Okay. Now these are pretty interesting questions from this engine repair 2 test 9 test. Intake and exhaust systems is the chapter from, chapter 20. Intake charge velocity has to be how much to prevent fuel droplet separation?
50 feet per second.
Very good. Did you read the chapter?
I don't even have the book.
Huh?
I don't even have the books.
Oh, okay. All right, we're gonna need that. Now, where did you get 50 feet per second?
Well, 100 and 300 seem too far apart.
Yeah. Yeah, that 25 didn't seem fast enough. Well, that's a pretty good guess. I'm pretty impressed there. The air filter restriction indicator uses what to detect when it signals to replace the filter? You know, the ones like you see on these GM vehicles, the little thing, the little clear thing that's got a spring-loaded colored deal in it?
The amount of light that can pass through the filter.
Well, sort of, but I mean, it doesn't know that. But what can it know? If it's between the air filter and the intake, what's going to cause that thing to move in and turn red? What?
Miles?
No, it won't be miles. It's not electric. It's just basically it's a little thing with a spring.
The amount of restriction measured in inches.
Bingo! The amount of restriction measured in inches of water. It's a good answer. Why are the EGR gases cooled before entering the engine on some engines? And how do they cool them? Basically, if you're running the EGR through this little tube that's doesn't have anything, it's just a naked steel tube, that's going to cool it a little bit. They're not cooling it extremely, but on diesels, they cool it a lot. So number 3 would be, why are the EGR gases cooled before entering the engine on some engines? What are you recirculating exhaust gas? Do you remember that, Brian? Remember we talked about that?
Keeps the engine hot.
Now we're going to cool off the combustion chamber by putting inert gas in there that won't burn, right?
So it'd be A then?
Yeah, basically the cool exhaust gas is more effective in controlling NOx emissions. All right, number 4, the air-fuel mixture flows through the intake manifold on what kind of system? Well, we don't see a carbureted system down there. Port fuel injection system doesn't have it flowing through there, does it?
No, throttle body.
It's only going to be throttle body, that's right. Number 5, air filters can remove particles in dirt as small as,
40 to 50 microns.
No, this one's going to be 10 to 25. I remember whenever they first put passenger compartment air filters in Taurus got them, but the first car that I know of, and I think I read this in one of our air conditioner textbooks that got a cabin air filter for the filter cabin air, was the Ford Contour in 1995. But anyway, it was a 25 micron filter. Why do many port fuel injected engines use long intake runners? What do you think would be the reason for that? Is not to reduce exhaust emissions.
C?
Well, yeah, it's going to be C actually. It's going to increase low RPM torque. And whenever you've got engines like the SHO engine that actually has these little butterflies in there that change the length of the intake runners on the fly, those particular kind of intake manifold systems, it's interesting to look at the power curve on those, because about the time they hit 3,600 RPM and those butterflies open, the RPM, where it would ordinarily be dropping off on a normal engine, it goes up some more because of the change in the length of the intake runners. So exhaust passages are included in some intake manifolds, like the one on this old Cadillac we're working on. Technician A says exhaust passages are used for exhaust gas recirculation. Technician B says the upper intake is often called the plenum. Who's right about that? Both of those guys are right. They used to run exhaust through there, even before they had EGR. They would run exhaust across through the underneath the carburetor through a passage in there, and they call it early fuel evaporation, because if the manifold was really cold, this vaporized fuel that was coming out of the carburetor would sometimes try to condense around the neck of the throat of the intake and it would have beads of gas around there. And then when you let off of your gas, sometimes it would suck some of that in there, and it caused backfire and all that kind of hogwash. So the long and the short of it is they wanted to heat that up as quick as they could. So on one side of the exhaust, and this sounds kind of counterintuitive, but on one side of the exhaust they had a butterfly that would close off one side of the exhaust right there at the base of the manifold. They call that a heat riser. And what that would do is it would force all of the exhaust that was coming out of the engine to go out one side, even though it was a V engine, and it would basically force the exhaust that was going to come out. Typically the driver's side would have the heat riser, but it could be on the other side. The exhaust that was coming out of the bank on that one side would have to be forced to go under the carburetor to exit the other side, and it would really heat the base of that carburetor up really good so that the fuel was well vaporized when it went in there. That was EFE. Ford Escorts had a little heated grid in there that actually had voltage going through it, so that grid would get really hot, and whenever the gas would hit it, it would and it would go on down in there. Let's see. The upper portion of a two-part intake manifold is often called what?
Plenum.
Plenum. Very good answer. Why do you need a plenum? What's the purpose of it? Why don't we just run that down in there and not even have a plenum? Why do we need plenum?
I don't know.
Well, nobody's ever told you, but the reason is, I was talking about all of the cylinders need to have the same amount of everything, right? So basically you're making a big box plenum chamber, and you're letting the air build up and sort of bunch up in there, and that provides equal pressure at every cylinder. That way you don't have one cylinder getting more air than the other. On the old carburetors, they used to have, like if it was a V engine, they would have a two-plane intake manifold to make sure that you would have the same length of intake runner going from the carburetor to every cylinder. If you just say, oh, well, I'm going to make me an intake manifold, and made it so that these two center cylinders had short runners going from the carburetor to the intake, and then the two other ones had long runners, then you would have some cylinders getting more air and fuel than others, and it would run unevenly. But that's what intake manifolds are all about. Everybody wants to get an equal amount of anything. They want to get an equal amount of air, equal amount of fuel, equal amount of EGR. It's really important. That's why that plenum is there. It's a big box, and it's got a constant pressure that feeds all the cylinders at the same pressure all the time. And a lot of people don't ever even think about that, but that's why that plenum is there. And that's why we're in school to learn about that, right? Technician A says a cracked exhaust manifold can affect engine operation. Technician B says a leaking lower intake manifold gasket could cause a vacuum leak.
Oh.
Yeah, that's a good thought there. Technician A says some intake manifolds are plastic. Technician B says some intake manifolds are constructed in two parts or sections, upper and lower.
Oh.
Yeah, that's right. Now they can't say all because there's a few that are different. All of these are main jobs of the air cleaner and filter parts except what? We're going to clean the air before it's mixed with the fuel. We're going to act as a flame arrestor in case of a backfire. We're going to silence the intake air noise. We're going to lower the intake air temperature. Is that what we're doing there? We're not lowering any intake air temperature with an air filter. So D is going to be the one there. Of course, you know these pretty well. Technician A says exhaust manifolds can be made from plastic or stainless steel. What do you think? Technician B says many intake manifolds have an EGR valve that regulates the amount of recirculated exhaust gas that enters the engine in order to increase NOx emissions. Are you going to increase NOx emissions? You don't ever want to do that, do you? So 12 is going to be, well, have you ever seen a stainless steel intake or exhaust manifold I'm talking about? Have you ever seen a stainless steel plastic exhaust manifold? We're talking exhaust.
I've never seen one.
You ain't got no plastic exhaust manifold. That thing would melt down before you can say don't do it. And they don't make them out of stainless steel either. That might not be a bad idea, but neither one of those guys are right. We're talking exhaust, not intake here, right? Intake's plastic. Look, the word exhaust is key there. Technician A says the exhaust system also contains a catalytic converter, exhaust pipes, muffler. Technician B says the entire exhaust system is supported by metal hangers that isolate the noise and vibration of the exhaust from the rest of the vehicle.
See.
Okay, you guys are, that particular one, let's see, the entire exhaust system is supported by metal hangers. What kind of hangers you usually see on these exhaust systems out here?
I thought they were metal, connected by a rubber piece.
Rubber is the deal. So the hanger's not. Hey man,
Can I
yeah,
pop in and look in this closet real quick?
yeah, sure. Move that, roll that little thing out of the way over there. You just grab it on the edge. It's not fun. Know what I mean? Here, let me do that.
Something over here.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, I still work. You just like peek in there, see.
Are you doing virtual stuff?
We are virtual outline. There you go. Very good. Oh, boy. You knew.
All right.
And it's just over.
Yep. Just a closet. Now the other side in there in that cage has got the air conditioner closet.
Air conditioner and water heater.
Yeah, that's
How they
good.
ever got that water heater in there, I don't know.
Well, they put a new one in there a while back.
I saw that.
Yeah. So
Thank you very much.
sure.
Have a great day.
Yes, sir. Okay. Let me see. So basically, it's the rubber that makes a difference on that. The intake manifold of a port fuel injected engine does what? Does it contain only air? Does it use a heater? Does it have use a leaner air fuel mixture than TBI, or does it contain only fuel? Think about it. The port fuel injection has got the injectors right down there by the intake valve. Right.
Contains only fuel.
It contains only air. Actually, there's not anything in there but air. Of course, there's also be some PCV steam and junk like that in there. All right. Let me see. Let's see. Wait a minute. Yeah, here we go. Technician A says intake manifolds are always made of metal. Is he right? No. Technician B says some intake manifolds are constructed in two parts.
Just beat them.
Yeah, that 15 is actually going to be B. The automotive engine uses about how many gallons of air for every gallon of gasoline burned in an air-fuel ratio of 14.7 to 1?
7,000.
Huh?
7,000.
9,000, believe it or not. So what is 14.7 to 1? How are we measuring that? What is 9,000 to 1? See, both of them are right. 9,000 to 1, 14.7 to 1. But what are the measurement standards of that, you know?
Yeah.
That's just a peculiar question, isn't it? It's one of those things that most people don't know, but it's got 9,000 is by volume, 9,000 gallons by volume, and by weight is 14.7 to 1. Engineers work in weight whenever you're talking about fuel. As a matter of fact, the injectors that you see, like these gray injectors that you see on some of the Fords, you know, and all, I remember they had a little table, and they'd say those gray fuel injectors would provide 14 pounds of fuel per hour, and the orange ones were 19 pounds of fuel per hour. So they operate in pounds of fuel per hour. I mean, basically the weight of the fuel, that's how they do it. We do gallons because that's how we buy it and how we figure our mileage, right? Some systems also have a what sensor between the throttle body and the air cleaner?
Mass air flow.
That's a good answer. Manifold sizes represent a compromise. They must have a cross-section large enough to allow charge flow for a maximum amount of what?
Flow resistance.
We're going to have power, basically. We don't want to have maximum flow resistance. We want a maximum amount of power. Shorter runners in a port fuel-injected engine provide what? Minimum high RPM power, increased low RPM power, minimum low RPM power, or increased high RPM power. Remember what I was talking about earlier. Short runners, how are they going to affect you? If you can shorten the runners while you're driving, you're going to get increased high RPM power. Remember I told you what they were. It would shorten the runners on that old show engine and some of the other.
Minimum low RPM power.
No, increased high RPM power. Now the long runners are going to help you at your lower RPM. A cracked exhaust manifold can cause false readings from which sensor? Cracked exhaust manifold can cause false readings from which of these sensors?
Exhaust temperature sensor.
Well, have you ever seen an
Oxygen sensor.
good answer. It wasn't the exhaust temperature sensor. Does anybody have any questions or comments?